It was supposed to be the happiest day of my daughter's life, the day she celebrated her birthday with all her friends. But instead of smiles and laughter, the air was filled with tension. As the candles flickered on her beautiful birthday cake, Karen, the HOA president, strutted in with her usual judgmental glare. Without warning, she marched up to the table, swiped her hand across the cake, and sent it crashing to the floor. The room fell silent. Her words stung even worse than the destruction of the cake itself. "This is too flashy for the neighborhood," she sneered, turning my daughter's celebration into a nightmare. My heart shattered as I watched my child's excitement turn to tears. But that wasn't the end of it. This was just the beginning of a fight I wasn't going to lose, not for my daughter, not for my family. It was a day I had been planning for months, every detail carefully thought out to make my disabled daughter's birthday unforgettable. She had waited for this moment, counting down the days with pure excitement. The decorations were perfect, the cake was beautiful, and the guests, our close friends and family, were ready to celebrate her strength and spirit. She had fought through so many challenges, and this day was meant to be a reflection of her triumphs. But as the guests began to gather, I felt a strange tension in the air. It wasn't long before Karen, the HOA president, walked into the room, her eyes scanning the party with judgment. She had always made it clear that she didn't approve of anything that didn't meet her standards, and I could already feel her disapproval brewing. Without any warning, she stormed over to the cake, her eyes narrowing in distaste, and with a sneer, she declared it was too flashy for the neighborhood. Then, as if to make her point, she pushed it off the table, sending my daughter's beautiful birthday cake crashing to the floor. My daughter's smile faded in an instant, replaced by confusion and hurt. The room fell silent as everyone watched in shock, but Karen stood there, smirking as if she'd just won some kind of battle. How could she destroy something so precious, so personal, just because it didn't fit her idea of what was acceptable? I had to do something. This wasn't just about a cake. It was about standing up for my daughter. And I was ready to fight back. Before we dive deeper into this story, comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more shocking real-life stories. It was the morning of my daughter's birthday, and the excitement in the air was palpable. For weeks, we had been planning every detail to make this day perfect. My daughter, who had been through so much, was beaming with joy. She had never asked for much, just a day to celebrate with her friends, a day where she didn't feel different or out of place. She wanted a party that reflected her spirit, colorful, vibrant, and full of life. The cake was the centerpiece of it all, a grand, multi-tiered creation with delicate, handcrafted flowers and bright colors that matched the joy in her heart. It was a symbol of her strength, a small victory over all the hardships she had endured. She was so excited to see it, and I couldn't wait to watch her face light up when she did. We had invited close family and friends, those who truly understood and supported us. The house was filled with laughter and chatter as guests arrived, and everything was falling into place perfectly. But then, as if on cue, Karen arrived. I had known this moment was coming. Karen, the HOA president, was never one to pass up an opportunity to criticize. She had already expressed her disapproval of our loud parties and our too flashy decorations. But today, I told myself, we would ignore her comments and focus on what truly mattered, celebrating my daughter. The moment she walked into the room, her eyes immediately darted to the cake. I could see the disapproving look cross her face. Without a word, she made her way toward the table where the cake sat proudly in front of all the guests. Her presence seemed to command the room as she stood there, eyeing the cake with what I can only describe as disgust. "This is too much," she muttered under her breath, but loud enough for the entire room to hear. "It's far too flashy for this neighborhood. It doesn't belong here." My stomach churned as I watched her criticize the one thing that my daughter had been so excited about. Before I could say anything, Karen reached out and swiped her hand across the cake, sending it crashing to the floor with a sickening thud. The room fell completely silent. My daughter's face, once filled with excitement, transformed into one of confusion and then devastation. She didn't understand why someone would destroy something so special to her, and I could see the hurt in her eyes. It was as if Karen had just stolen her joy, right there in front of everyone. The laughter that had once filled the air was replaced with uncomfortable silence, and the whispers began. I looked around at our guests, some were in shock, others unsure of what to do. No one moved to stop Karen. No one stepped in to defend my daughter. And then Karen, with her smug look, turned to me and said, "I just don't think this type of celebration is appropriate for the neighborhood." Her words stung more than anything she had done. It wasn't just about the cake. It was about her rejection of my daughter, her cruelty towards something that had meant so much to us. I could feel my blood boiling, but I held it in, not wanting to make a scene. I didn't want to make this moment worse than it already was. But as the room stood frozen, I realized something. I wasn't going to let Karen get away with this. I wasn't going to let her tarnish this day for my daughter. My mind raced as I tried to process what had just happened. How could she do this? What gave her the right to destroy our celebration? I turned to my daughter, who was standing there, tears starting to well up in her eyes. "Sweetheart, it's okay," I whispered, trying to comfort her. But the truth was, nothing was okay. Not anymore. She had been humiliated in front of everyone she cared about, all because of one person's need to control what was acceptable. As I watched my daughter struggle to hold back tears, a fire ignited within me. I wasn't going to let this go. Karen's actions would not go unanswered. I had to stand up for my daughter, for her happiness, for her right to be celebrated. This wasn't just about the cake, it was about showing my daughter that no one, not even the HOA president, could destroy her spirit. The party was ruined, yes. But the battle had just begun. I wasn't going to let Karen or anyone else take away my daughter's sense of worth. That cake may have been destroyed, but our resolve wasn't. I would make sure Karen faced the consequences for what she had done. This wouldn't be the last time she heard from me. And so, in that moment, amidst the shattered pieces of the cake, I made a vow to myself and to my daughter. I would fight for her happiness, and I would make sure that no one, especially Karen, could ever take that away from her again. The quiet and polite world we had tried to live in was no longer enough. It was time to stand up, and it was time to make things right. The day had started full of hope and joy, but now it was charged with a fury I could no longer ignore. This wasn't just about one woman's hatred toward my daughter's celebration. This was about standing up for what was right. And I was ready for whatever came next. The room was heavy with silence, the once joyful atmosphere now tainted by the wreckage of the birthday cake. My daughter stood there, frozen in disbelief, her small hands trembling as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. Her eyes, wide with confusion, searched mine for answers, as if she couldn't grasp the reality of the situation. How could anyone, especially someone who was supposed to uphold the rules of the community, destroy something that meant so much to her? I watched as the tears slowly started to well up in her eyes, and my heart broke all over again. I wanted to tell her that everything was going to be okay, that the party could go on, but the truth was, nothing felt okay. How could I explain this to her? How could I make her understand why Karen, someone we barely knew, could be so cruel? As she stood there, struggling to hold back her tears, I could feel my own anger rising within me. This wasn't just about a cake, it was about the cruelty of a person who had no respect for our family, for our celebration, and for my daughter. Karen's actions weren't just thoughtless, they were intentional, meant to hurt and humiliate. I had seen that smug smile on her face when she made the comment about the cake being too flashy, and I couldn't help but wonder, had she planned this all along? Was this her idea of teaching us a lesson? I turned to look at the other guests. Some stood in stunned silence, their faces etched with disbelief, while others looked away, unwilling to meet my gaze. A few of our neighbors, people who had been friendly with us before, stood by, their arms crossed, offering no help, no support. It was as if they were afraid to speak up, afraid of Karen's power over the neighborhood. But there were others who did speak up, those who had witnessed Karen's actions for the first time and were equally horrified. One of our family friends, a woman who had always been kind to my daughter, stepped forward, her voice shaking with emotion. "That was uncalled for," she said, her words directed not just at Karen, but at the whole room. "What kind of person does that to a little girl?" But even her support felt hollow in the face of the overwhelming silence that followed. It was clear that Karen held influence over many in the community, and that power was enough to make even the most well-meaning people hesitate. It was maddening. Here we were, surrounded by people who had witnessed a clear injustice, and yet no one was willing to stand up for us. The room was divided, those who saw the wrongness of Karen's actions and those who feared what would happen if they spoke out. My own frustration grew with every passing second. How had things come to this? How had we let one person's cruelty define the tone of our entire celebration? My daughter's birthday, a day that was supposed to be a celebration of her strength and resilience, had turned into a painful lesson in injustice. As I looked at her, I could see the hurt in her eyes, the way she tried to hold it together for the sake of the party, but deep down, I knew she was crushed. The innocence in her face had been replaced with something much more complicated, an understanding of cruelty that no child should ever have to experience. I felt a lump in my throat as I approached her, pulling her into a tight hug. "Sweetheart, don't let this ruin your day," I whispered, even though I was struggling to hold back my own tears. "This is your day, and no one can take that away from you." She nodded weakly, but I could feel the uncertainty in her body, the way she clung to me as if I were the only thing that could make sense of what had just happened. I wished I could make everything right, I wished I could undo the damage Karen had done with a single word, but I knew that wasn't possible. The only thing I could do was stand firm, be there for her, and make sure Karen faced the consequences of her actions. As the party slowly dissolved into awkward chatter, I found myself wrestling with a sense of powerlessness. The day that was meant to be a moment of joy had become a battleground, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were losing. The cake had been destroyed, yes, but the damage to my daughter's spirit, her belief that people should be kind and supportive, felt like the real tragedy. Karen had stolen something far more precious than a cake that day. But even as the party began to thin out, I knew that the fight wasn't over. The tears in my daughter's eyes wouldn't be wiped away by Karen's cruelty alone. This wasn't just about punishing her for ruining a birthday party. This was about standing up for what was right, for showing my daughter that we would never let anyone, no matter how powerful they were, make her feel less than she was. I wasn't going to let Karen win. Not now, not ever. I made a silent vow then, standing there amidst the wreckage of my daughter's birthday, that I would take action. Karen had crossed a line, and it was time for me to draw a line in the sand. I wasn't going to sit back and let this go unnoticed. My daughter deserved better, and so did everyone who had been affected by Karen's toxic behavior. This wasn't just about a ruined cake, it was about justice, about teaching my daughter that standing up for what's right mattered, even when it seemed like the whole world was against you. The aftermath of the incident was raw and painful, but I knew one thing for certain, it was only the beginning. The battle for my daughter's dignity, for our family's peace, was just starting, and I wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. The moment the party was over and the guests had left, an overwhelming sense of helplessness washed over me. I watched as my daughter slowly retreated to her room, her face still stained with tears, her spirit clearly crushed by what had happened. I knew I needed to do something, anything, to fix the damage Karen had caused, not just to our celebration, but to my daughter's heart. It wasn't enough to simply comfort her. I couldn't just let Karen's actions go unchallenged. I had to stand up for my daughter. I had to show her that no one, not even Karen, could take away her happiness and her sense of self-worth. But I also knew that the road ahead would not be easy. Karen was not just any neighbor, she was the HOA president, and she wielded a power that could make life difficult for anyone who dared to oppose her. However, the thought of letting her win, of letting her think she could destroy my daughter's joy without consequences, was something I couldn't live with. That night, after my daughter had gone to bed, I sat down with my husband and explained everything that had happened. I told him about Karen's actions, the way she'd humiliated our daughter in front of everyone, and how I felt like we were being pushed into a corner. He listened quietly at first, his face set with frustration, his eyes narrowed in disbelief at the injustice of it all. But then he said something that stuck with me. "We can't just let her get away with this," he said, his voice firm. "She needs to be held accountable. It's not just about the cake, it's about standing up for what's right, for our family." His words ignited a fire in me that I hadn't realized was still smoldering beneath the surface. It wasn't just about a ruined birthday party, it was about teaching our daughter that her voice mattered, that she had the right to stand up to bullies, even when they were in positions of power. I couldn't let Karen walk away from this, not when my daughter had suffered so much. We had to make sure she understood that no one could hurt our family and get away with it. The first step was clear: I needed evidence. I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures of the remnants of the cake, the broken pieces scattered across the floor. The party decorations that had been torn apart, the gifts my daughter had received but never had the chance to open, everything felt like a physical manifestation of the emotional wreckage Karen had left in her wake. I documented everything meticulously, making sure to capture every detail that would prove the injustice of what had happened. I knew that if we were going to take action, we needed to have the evidence to back it up. There was no room for mistakes. The next day, I began reaching out to the neighbors who had been at the party, asking if anyone had witnessed Karen's behavior and if they would be willing to speak up. Some were hesitant, understandably so, knowing that going against Karen could mean facing her wrath. But a few of them agreed to come forward, offering their accounts of the incident. One of them, a close friend who had been there to celebrate my daughter's special day, was particularly vocal about Karen's actions. "What she did was disgusting," she told me, her voice filled with anger. "No one has the right to treat a child like that, let alone destroy her happiness. You can't let this go." As the days passed, I started to feel a sense of determination building within me. The more I gathered, photographs, witness statements, and even videos that some of the guests had taken, the more I realized that Karen's actions couldn't be ignored. It wasn't just about her destroying a cake. It was about her overstepping boundaries, trying to dictate what was acceptable, and humiliating my daughter in the process. I could no longer sit back and pretend that everything was fine. My daughter deserved better. She deserved justice. And I was going to be the one to get it for her. I spent hours researching how to file a formal complaint with the HOA, looking into the bylaws and the procedures for addressing grievances. I reached out to a local lawyer, someone who had experience dealing with cases involving neighborhood disputes, and asked for advice. Every step I took felt like I was gaining ground, but there was a constant nagging fear in the back of my mind: what if Karen retaliated? What if she used her position to make things even worse for us? The thought was terrifying, but I couldn't let that fear stop me. If I let her get away with this, what kind of message would that send to my daughter? That the people in power could do whatever they wanted without consequences? I refused to let her live in a world where that was the truth. One night, after I had compiled all the evidence and written out my complaint, I sat down with my daughter. I didn't want her to feel like she was in any way to blame for what had happened. I didn't want her to think that the party's failure was her fault. I explained to her what we were going to do next, that we were going to stand up to Karen, that we were going to make sure she couldn't hurt anyone else the way she had hurt us. "You are worth so much more than the way she treated you," I told her, my voice shaking with emotion. "This is about showing you that you don't ever have to let anyone make you feel small. You are strong, and we are going to fight for you." My daughter looked up at me, her eyes still red from the tears, but a small spark of hope flickered behind them. She nodded, and for the first time since the incident, I saw a glimmer of the girl I had always known, a girl who, despite everything, was still brave and full of life. That's when I knew, without a doubt, that this was the right thing to do. I wasn't just fighting for justice for my daughter, I was fighting for her future, for the kind of world I wanted her to live in. The decision to fight back had been made, and there was no turning back now. I had gathered my evidence, enlisted the help of my neighbors, and prepared the necessary paperwork. I was ready to face Karen head-on and demand that she be held accountable for her actions. No more hiding, no more turning the other cheek. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. My daughter deserved better, and I was going to make sure she got it. As the day of the confrontation approached, my resolve only strengthened. This wasn't just about a party or a cake. This was about taking a stand for what was right, about showing my daughter that she could face down the bullies, the people who tried to tear her down, and still come out stronger on the other side. It was time to show Karen that she didn't have the power to break us. The day of the confrontation had arrived, and the weight of the decision hung heavily on my shoulders. I had gathered all the evidence, contacted the neighbors who were willing to speak out, and prepared myself for what was about to unfold. But no matter how many times I rehearsed it in my mind, nothing could have truly prepared me for the emotional intensity of facing Karen head-on. I had scheduled a meeting with Karen through the HOA. The moment she walked into the room, I could feel the tension in the air. Her smug, self-assured smile immediately set my nerves on edge, but I was resolute. This was my daughter's justice at stake, and I wasn't going to let Karen bully her any longer. I started by calmly explaining the situation, laying out all the facts. I told her how my daughter's birthday, a day that was meant to celebrate her resilience, had been ruined by her thoughtless actions. "Karen," I said, my voice firm but controlled, "you destroyed my daughter's cake. You publicly humiliated her in front of all our friends and family. You made her feel like she didn't belong in this community just because her celebration didn't fit your idea of what was appropriate. This isn't just about a ruined cake, this is about how you treated my child. How you treated me." I watched as Karen's expression shifted from smugness to defensiveness, her arms folding across her chest in that familiar, arrogant posture she always took. "I don't know what you're talking about," she snapped. "I didn't ruin anything. You're blowing this out of proportion. That cake was an eyesore, and everyone in this neighborhood knows it." Her words stung, but I refused to let them shake me. I had all the evidence, pictures of the destroyed cake, witness statements from the guests who had seen everything unfold. I took a deep breath and continued. "I have evidence, Karen. Witnesses who saw what you did. And I'm not going to let this go. My daughter deserves to have her feelings acknowledged. She deserves an apology." Karen's eyes flickered briefly with annoyance before she quickly regained her composure. "You're threatening me with a lawsuit?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is that what this is? You really think anyone is going to side with you over me?" The question struck a nerve. I wasn't just fighting Karen anymore, I was fighting against a system that had long allowed her to wield her power unchecked. "This isn't about threatening you, Karen. It's about doing what's right. You've done this before, haven't you? Used your position to intimidate others, to control what's acceptable in this neighborhood. But you can't bully us into silence anymore. This ends today." Karen leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing as if trying to intimidate me. "You really want to take this public, huh? You think the neighborhood is going to care? They're all just waiting for someone like you to stir up drama. You'll lose. People like you always lose." Her words were like a slap in the face, but I didn't flinch. I stood tall, my voice unwavering. "No, Karen. People like you lose. You think you can control everything, but you've underestimated one thing. You've underestimated how much I'm willing to fight for my daughter. And I'm not going to let you get away with this." The room felt heavier as the conversation began to spiral. Karen's manipulation was on full display. She tried to twist the facts, throwing accusations back at me, claiming that I was being unreasonable and attacking her position as HOA president. She even tried to paint herself as the victim, claiming that I was the one disrupting the peace by bringing this nonsense to her doorstep. "You're the one causing problems here," she insisted. "If you would just keep things like everyone else, none of this would have happened." My blood boiled, but I didn't let her see it. I had learned long ago that reacting to her manipulation only fed into her narrative. Instead, I calmly pushed back. "This isn't about keeping things like everyone else. This is about standing up for what's right, and making sure that you are held accountable for your actions." Karen was losing control, and she knew it. The smugness that had been so prevalent earlier started to fade, replaced by a look of frustration. "You'll never win. The board will never side with you. They all know I'm just trying to keep the neighborhood in check. You've already caused enough trouble, and now you want to ruin my reputation too? You're nothing but a troublemaker." Her words were venomous, designed to provoke me, to make me second-guess myself. But I wasn't going to back down. I had a responsibility to my daughter, to all the children in this neighborhood who might be the next targets of Karen's cruelty. This wasn't about me, it was about ensuring that no one else would have to suffer the way my daughter had. "I'm not here to ruin your reputation, Karen. I'm here to protect my daughter. And I'm going to make sure that you can't hurt anyone else." The atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. It was no longer just a conversation, it was a showdown. I could see that Karen was beginning to realize that this wasn't going the way she had anticipated. She had thought she could intimidate me into backing down, but instead, she was faced with a mother who had nothing left to lose. "Fine," she spat, "but don't think this is over. I'll make sure you regret this. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you're trying to do." But I wasn't afraid. I had come too far, and I wasn't about to let her have the last word. "Go ahead, Karen," I said, my voice steady. "Do your worst. But know this, I'll be right here, fighting for my daughter every step of the way. And I will not back down." The room was silent after that, the weight of our exchange hanging in the air. Karen stood up to leave, her face a mask of fury, but as she reached for the door, I called after her one last time. "This isn't about winning or losing, Karen. This is about doing what's right. And you can't stop that." She turned, her eyes blazing, and walked out without another word. The confrontation was over, but I knew the real battle was just beginning. I had made my stand, and no matter what Karen did next, she would never have the power to break me, or my daughter, again. As I stood there, I felt a surge of empowerment. I had faced down the bully, and I hadn't backed down. This was the first victory in a long fight, and no matter the outcome, I knew I had done the right thing. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear, I wasn't going to let Karen, or anyone else, silence me. My daughter's future, and the future of this neighborhood, depended on it. The days following the confrontation with Karen were tense, charged with a simmering uncertainty that seemed to seep into every aspect of our lives. Karen didn't take kindly to being challenged, and it quickly became clear that she was not going to back down quietly. As expected, she began to retaliate, using her position as the HOA president to make life difficult for us. I had anticipated this, but the reality of her power felt overwhelming. It started small, a few passive-aggressive comments in the neighborhood's group chat, insinuating that I was causing trouble where there was none. Then, it escalated. Karen began sending notices, citing obscure HOA rules, claiming that our property was in violation of some minor clause that no one had ever enforced before. The threats kept coming, fines for supposed violations, letters warning us of potential action against our home. She was determined to use every tool at her disposal to make us regret standing up to her. At first, the pressure felt unbearable. It was clear that Karen was trying to push us out, hoping that we would give up and leave the neighborhood in defeat. The stress was overwhelming, especially for my daughter, who had already been through so much. I could see the anxiety in her eyes as we dealt with the constant barrage of HOA complaints. It was heartbreaking to watch, but it also strengthened my resolve. I wasn't going to let Karen win. Not this time. I was done being intimidated. In the face of Karen's retaliation, I decided to take action. I reached out to the neighbors who had witnessed the destruction of the cake and the cruelty Karen had shown. Slowly, they began to rally behind us. Some spoke up in the HOA meetings, telling others what had happened at the party, describing Karen's actions in detail, while others offered their support privately, sharing similar stories of how Karen had used her position to bully other residents in the past. I wasn't alone in this fight, and the more people who stood with me, the stronger our cause became. Word spread quickly, and the once silent neighbors started to speak up, no longer willing to let Karen's behavior go unchallenged. At the same time, I sought legal advice. I consulted with an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes, explaining the situation and the pattern of retaliation that Karen had started. My lawyer reviewed the evidence we had gathered, the photographs of the destroyed cake, witness testimonies, and the letters Karen had sent. He was appalled by Karen's actions and assured me that we had a solid case. Armed with legal support, I began to take action. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, demanding that Karen's behavior be addressed and that her position be reviewed in light of the ongoing harassment. It was a long shot, but I knew we had a strong case, and I was ready to fight. The pressure mounted as Karen began to escalate her tactics, but I refused to back down. I began to document everything, every letter, every interaction with Karen, and every unjustified fine. I sent official complaints to the HOA board, detailing Karen's actions and how they violated the values of the community. Slowly, the tide began to turn. More and more residents reached out to me privately, expressing their support. They had seen Karen's behavior firsthand and were tired of living in fear of her. The more people came forward, the clearer it became that Karen's reign of control was slipping. And then, one day, I received a call from the HOA board. They wanted to meet with me to discuss the situation. I was cautious but hopeful. Had they finally realized what kind of person Karen truly was? When I arrived at the meeting, I was met by a group of board members who seemed genuinely concerned about the reports of harassment. They had reviewed the evidence I had submitted and had spoken with some of the neighbors who had been willing to testify against Karen. The board members were shocked by what they had uncovered: Karen's retaliatory actions, her misuse of power, and her inability to maintain the standards of fairness that the HOA was supposed to uphold. The board was unanimous in their decision: Karen's position was under review, and she would be given a formal reprimand. They also announced that they were investigating the HOA fines and complaints that had been levied against us, as many appeared to be fabricated or based on arbitrary rules that were never enforced before. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. Karen's grip on the neighborhood was finally starting to loosen. But this wasn't the end, just a turning point. Karen wasn't going to let this go quietly. I knew that she would fight back with everything she had. But I also knew that we were no longer fighting alone. The community had seen through her facade, and they were standing with us. This was no longer just about one incident, it was about taking a stand against the abuse of power, about ensuring that no one could treat others with such cruelty and get away with it. The fight was far from over, but with each passing day, I could feel the momentum shifting. The community was waking up to Karen's true nature, and with every person who came forward, every board member who stood against her, we were one step closer to justice. The fallout of that confrontation had been difficult, but it had also brought something powerful: solidarity. It had brought a renewed sense of community, a commitment to standing up for what's right, no matter how powerful the opposition. The pressure Karen had put on us only made us stronger, more determined to see this through. And with each victory, no matter how small, I knew we were one step closer to ensuring that Karen would no longer have the power to hurt my family, or anyone else, ever again. The fallout had been ugly, but it had sparked a change. And that change was going to be lasting. The day we had been fighting for finally arrived. After weeks of tension, meetings, and back-and-forth battles with Karen, the moment when justice was finally served felt like both a relief and a victory, a moment where everything we had been through had led to this very point. It didn't come easy, but nothing worth fighting for ever does. Karen's reign of terror in the neighborhood had slowly been crumbling with every piece of evidence we submitted, every neighbor who spoke out, and every legal step we took. But even then, I knew that the true victory wouldn't come from simply defeating Karen, it would come from ensuring that my daughter, our family, and the entire community could move forward, stronger and more united than before. The HOA board meeting was the turning point. I sat in that room, my heart pounding in my chest, as the board members read through the evidence and testimonies we had collected. The severity of Karen's actions had finally sunk in for everyone. They realized that Karen's behavior wasn't just an isolated incident, it was part of a broader pattern of harassment, intimidation, and abuse of power. The board had already issued a formal reprimand, but it didn't stop there. Karen's position as HOA president was officially under review. They also began the process of revising the HOA rules to make sure that no one, especially someone with her influence, could ever wield their power so destructively again. It was a long time coming, but the first real sign of justice was right there in that room, the acknowledgement that Karen had misused her authority and that her actions would no longer be tolerated. Still, there was one more hurdle to cross before the victory would feel truly complete. Karen, predictably, did not take her fall from power lightly. She fought back, as we knew she would, trying to turn the tables with a campaign of her own. She spread lies, claimed that we had manipulated the HOA and the neighbors, and accused me of making a mountain out of a molehill. But as she tried to manipulate the narrative, she found that the community had already made up its mind. The people who had been silent before were now speaking out, and they weren't just supporting us, they were standing up to her. The tide had completely turned. It was no longer about a ruined birthday cake. It was about the collective strength of a community refusing to let one person bully them any longer. And then, the final blow came when the HOA board officially voted to remove Karen from her position. The decision was unanimous. It wasn't just about the birthday incident anymore, it was about a community coming together to demand accountability. We weren't going to let Karen's toxic influence hold sway over us any longer. The victory wasn't just legal, it was moral. The sense of justice was overwhelming, and as I walked out of that meeting with my family by my side, I couldn't help but feel that we had not only won back our peace but had also paved the way for others to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. The impact on my daughter was immediate. It wasn't that the cake could be replaced, it wasn't about the material things. But there was something deeply healing in watching her slowly regain the sparkle in her eyes, the confidence in her smile. The world she had once seen as a place of rejection and judgment had suddenly transformed into one where she had power, where her voice mattered. The courage she saw in me, the determination I had shown, had been a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life. She no longer saw herself as the victim of someone's cruelty, she saw herself as someone who could stand up, who could fight back, and who could make a difference. The road had been hard, but it had made her stronger, and seeing her happy again, truly happy, free of fear, was worth every moment of the struggle. Our family, too, had grown stronger. The experience had brought us closer together, united in a shared determination to protect what mattered most. The support we received from the neighbors who rallied behind us showed me that, even in a world that sometimes seems dominated by power-hungry individuals like Karen, there are still people who believe in fairness, who will stand up for the truth. That was a lesson I would never forget. We had witnessed firsthand the power of community, the strength that comes from people banding together in the face of injustice. It wasn't just our victory, it was everyone's victory. And I knew that, in the long run, this would serve as a reminder that no one, no matter how powerful they think they are, can break the spirit of a united community. For Karen, the fallout was inevitable. Her reputation, once built on fear and manipulation, crumbled as the truth about her actions became widely known. Her influence in the neighborhood was gone. The community had turned its back on her, and she was left with nothing but the consequences of her own behavior. It was a bitter irony, someone who had spent so long trying to control others had been undone by her own arrogance. As for us, we were finally free from her grasp. The HOA, now under new leadership, began to repair the damage Karen had done, implementing new policies to ensure that no one would ever have to face the same kind of treatment we had endured. But more importantly, they reaffirmed the core values of the community, values of respect, kindness, and support. We had become an example for others who might feel powerless in the face of bullying or intimidation. Our victory was more than just about Karen, it was about reclaiming our sense of dignity, about showing my daughter that the world could be a better place if we were brave enough to fight for it. Looking back, it's hard to believe how much we had to go through to get here. It felt like an eternity at times, but now, as I watch my daughter laughing with her friends, unburdened by the past, I know that every step was worth it. We had won more than just a legal battle. We had won back our peace, our community, and our family's sense of justice. And that, in the end, is the most powerful victory of all. If this story resonated with you, it's time to make your voice heard. Have you ever faced injustice or stood up against bullying? Share your experiences in the comments below and let us know where you're watching from, we'd love to hear your story. Together, we can create a community of strength and support. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful, real-life stories about standing up for what's right, no matter the odds. By subscribing, you'll join a movement of people who refuse to let injustice go unnoticed. Stand with us, share this video, and let's show the world that when we unite, we're unstoppable.